Hey everyone, welcome to week 53. This is day, all of them, Monday through Friday. This is going to be a bit of a weird week for us. We're trying something a little bit new. This is not something we're going to be able to do like all the time. But this is a special week because I was able to have a conversation with whom I consider to be the greatest contemporary painter, Ruprecht von Kaufmann. And we were able to talk for 2 hours. I think he was super generous to talk to me for 2 hours. And we thought about breaking that video up into 5 sections so that we could use one of those segments for each day of the week. And then we would have a Monday through Friday video. But honestly, I think that that would break up the rhythm of the conversation. And I just didn't plan ahead thinking that I could have 20-minute segments. So what we decided to do was just put the whole conversation in. The audio is unedited, so you guys are going to hear, the whole conversation as it went. And accompanying that conversation, we're going to have the 5 paintings, the making of the 5 paintings. And for this week's theme, we chose to speak about after. And what after means, it's actually trying to evoke, the remnants, all the things that are left behind after an action takes place. And the action that took place for me, was speaking to somebody that I admire profoundly. So I was trying to deal with all this information, with everything that he said and trying to see how that kind of affects my work and at what measure it affects my work. So this is just me reflecting upon those things. So, this is a little bit different. I hope you guys enjoy it. Bear with me because I was very nervous, and he is, the painter that I admire the most, living painter that I admire the most. I think he is that great. So obviously I'm gushing a lot and I talk a lot. So as an interviewer, terrible because I talk like crazy. But, this was just me being very excited to talk with somebody that I think so highly of. So I hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you next week with a whole new theme. So thank you. Bye. Dude, thank you so much. Thank you.
Sure,
This is very
my pleasure.
no, this is very special for me. I'm gonna try to not to sound like I'm insanely excited to talk to you because I am. So, but thank you. I know you're super busy. So this was something that
Yeah, no,
I'm kind of doing for this project that we have with my girlfriend where we're doing a bunch of videos. But honestly,
right.
and I don't mind telling people this, I'm doing it for myself. Like I've wanted to talk to you for a very, very long time. You probably don't know this, but and I'll start with this little story. But I remember when you were showing at Ann Nathan in Chicago. So this is probably like you know early 2000s, right? And you were at
Yeah,
that
it's
gallery.
2001 actually.
Right, right. And you were at that gallery. And at the time, I was in a gallery that, we shouldn't mention the gallery because it was terrible. It was really, really tacky. And I was doing like, horrible commercial work, I would say. Uh, but I thought that underneath the work that I was doing, a gallery director or a curator would be able to see that, there was like a potential for me to be like a really cool artist. And I went to a fair that was in Miami, and it was, at that time, it's not like saying like Art Basel today that's in Miami. This was a Miami art fair at the time, and I was super excited because that gallery that you were in was going to be there, and I had a catalog all done from my work, and I was hoping to show it to the director or whomever was in charge, of the gallery at that moment. And I showed it to him. It was this guy. I honestly don't remember his name. And I showed it to him, and I was super excited. Like I said, I hoped that they would see potential instead of seeing like, okay, this is like resolved work. This is what you know what you're like. You actually know what you're doing, and this is what we can expect of you. And the guy was brutal. I mean, it was tough. It was very tough for me because I knew that I wanted to be in a place like the one that you were at, but my work was all over the place. My work was terrible. My work didn't really show what I wanted to be, where I wanted to be. And when I showed it to him, he just flipped through it super, super quickly. And then he gave it back to me, and he was like, "Oh, these things are expensive. You should probably give it to somebody who really, cares." And I was like, "Oh my God, this is tough. This was very, very tough." But it was really good for me because it actually, after that moment, it was like at the beginning of me telling myself, okay, is this why you studied painting? Like to do these sorts of paintings, or are you actually going to work towards the painter that you want to be? So it was a moment that it was important for me. And I tie it to you because the only reason I was interested in this gallery is because I think that at that moment, that gallery was actually very cool. It was showing like a mix of, contemporary painting, but also it was open to, what I would, consider like work that was kind of grounded in figurative work that was trying to at least, I don't know if tell a story, but propose a story of some sorts. And I was like, yeah, that's what I want to be. And I didn't know much of you as a painter back then, but I later on realized that you studied illustration. I didn't know that about you. Was that a choice? Did you think of becoming an illustrator at some point, or did you choose it because in illustration, and that was my case, that's where you found teachers that would teach somewhat traditional drawing and somewhat traditional like painting skills?
You know what? Like I first have to um, get off your question for a second because it's funny you mentioned that story about Anne Nathan. Because I remember when I was first invited for a group show at her gallery, and I told her the story like a few years later, and she doesn't remember. She doesn't say it happened. But I definitely remember. So I sent her like the first, like it was like 2 small paintings for a group show.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't hear anything from them, didn't hear if they arrived. So rang them up and asked them, so did you get my paintings? And I was on the phone and she said like, they're terrible. Ruprecht, these paintings are horrible. They're really terrible paintings. I don't think I can show these. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Like, never mind. Like, if you think they're so terrible, just send it back to me. Like it's no harm done. So then, the paintings didn't come back.
Looking back, do you think they're still terrible? Do you remember which 2 paintings they were, and do you still see them as something that's terrible?
I mean, to be quite honest, like, it's a long time ago, and my work has evolved a lot since then. So the Ruprecht of today probably wouldn't approve of them all that much, but yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't think they were really terrible painting, but the story goes on because like then after this conversation on the phone, I didn't hear from them, and I didn't get the paintings back either. So like 2 months pass or something, and I called them up and I'm like, hey, did you send back those paintings? Like I was waiting for them, they haven't shown up. And she's all, oh yeah, like I sold them. Those paintings were great, fantastic paintings. When are you going to send more? So that's how my work relationship with Anne Nathan started. And she could be a really tough person.
No, I appreciated that toughness at that time. Honestly, I think it steered me in the right direction. And even though, I mean, I don't want to generalize, but yeah, what you describe is pretty much every relationship. Well, not every. I've had incredible human, relationships with gallery directors and curators that I do feel I've connected on a very, on a level that goes beyond, trying to sell paintings. But usually a gallery will just, love you if you sell paintings and not interested in you if you don't. That's kind of how it goes. I mean, because from what you're saying, I can gather that what changed her mind was that the painting sold. That was just it.
Yeah, I mean, like that's also the point that I took away from it. Like when a painting sells or a painter sells, galleries love them, and the interest can also fade just as quickly when It gets harder to sell the work of an artist. And so for me, that was the beginning of realizing that the market isn't a very good gauge with which to measure the worth of your work, really, because it's arbitrary, and in the end you have to find other ways to measure for yourself whether your work is any good or not.
Yeah, I was gonna say you almost went head on because you started doing these. I mean, I'm guessing at the time you also did these, oversized paintings, but which I imagine that, yeah, they're potentially something that you can, commercially speaking, you could be able to get like a good amount of money if you sell them, but also a large painting, and I'm talking about sizes that you work on, they are not easy to sell either. So it's kind of wonderful that you had that notion that even though there was that kind of commercial obstacle in front, you made it harder for yourself by doing these, huge paintings that I think you still do.
I still do. I mean, I've gotten a little bit more reasonable about sizes recently. Um, but like this whole thing never was supposed to be about it being easy. It's supposed to be about what you believe in and what feels right to you as an artist. Otherwise, I don't think it's worth the hassle, right?
Right.
Like if if you want to have it easy, then I don't know, you get some kind of other job than artist. Um, it's it's not the profession you choose for um, convenience.
Did you did you imagine, going back to the question that I was saying at the beginning? Did you understand yourself as an artist that, I don't know how much you were interested in illustration. I don't know how much illustration played a role into the sort of, image making that you do, but did you understand yourself as a painter from that moment when you were younger, or did you not, or has this path, been carved while, you work, during these years that you've been painting?
Well, I mean, like I seriously thought that I was gonna become an illustrator. That was the plan, and that was the idea, and what I thought would happen when I first initially started studying illustration. See, the thing was that at least in Germany at the time when I graduated from high school, and it's always the kid who got into trouble for distracting classmates by drawing, or for you know um, making drawings on school property and stuff. And eventually my teachers just gave up because they realized that I could actually follow what was going on in class and still be drawing. And so they, grudgingly um, tolerated me doing that. Excuse me.
Oh, don't worry.
Um, but I couldn't imagine becoming an artist as a profession, because what I really liked was drawing humans and drawing things that I was seeing, and sort of incorporating the world around me into my drawing. And so the notion never actually even occurred to me that I could be an artist. And only when I discovered, okay, there was like um, an actual illustration program in at Art Center, that um, I figured, oh yeah, like that might be a path, like I could become an illustrator. This is actually great. Like they do a lot of the things that I really love. And then it was professors in the illustration program who sort of took me aside and said, like, well, like you always seem to be doing your own stories anyway, so why don't you just make paintings that are entirely your own thing, and you don't make a painting about an issue or an idea of somebody else. And that's sort of was the beginning where I start steering away from illustration more into the fine arts route. And at the same time, I met professors. A lot of the people who were happened to be at Art Center at the time were fine artists who did figurative paintings, and I'm all of a sudden like, wow, like that's even possible. So, and that, seeing that was a possibility, even for me, opened the door to actually considering going for it.
Did you have any links with the US? Like, was that something that you were interested in? Or did you already know about the art center? Or was this like a first experience that, you're going to this art school in the US with no real expectations?
You know what I mean? Like this is a story that's going to illustrate to you how naive I was, and I was very young when I started at art center, or relatively young, and it's I meant to become a veterinarian, and then my dad actually talked me out of it, and he said like, yeah, like why don't you consider doing something creative, like some kind of applied arts kind of profession? And so at the time, Art Center actually had like a second campus in Switzerland, and actually like. I think it was Ferdinand Porsche. We somehow, my dad got contact to the a guy who does Porsche design. I think he's a nephew of the guy who invented the car.
Oh wow!
And he was a very famous designer at the time. So, but I had no clue. Obviously, like I didn't really know who the guy was, except that I recognized the name vaguely. So we went there, and he said like, oh yeah, like like if you want to go to a really good school, go to the school in Switzerland. So, I decided, okay, like I'm gonna apply there, and I started applying, and I wanted to do graphic design there. And then while I was in Switzerland, I realized, okay, like graphic designers only. I mean, this is not supposed to be demeaning to graphic designers. I've got great admiration for them, but they just push type around, like, and type didn't interest me, right? Like, but I was very naive. I thought like, yeah, like the cool illustration between the type also comes from the graphic designer. And then only, flipping through a catalog of the US campus, I realized, okay, this is wrong. Like, it's actually not. What graphic designers do, and there's a separate profession. So I reapplied for the campus in LA, and I didn't really think about what that would entail. And I didn't, at the time worry about moving to another continent. I just, oh yeah, like I apply, and then I try to go, and I went.
And was there always by the way, my dad was a veterinarian, and he was the one who pushed me to go to New York because I wanted to do comic books, and I was applying to at the time it was almost like one of the few places that you could study for comic books, but that was in New Jersey, and it was a very small school. So my dad, the vet, was the one that told me, why don't you apply to New York? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know anything about New York. But he was like, well, you don't know anything about Jersey, because I had never been, my parents lived in the US, and I was born there when I was, and then I spent there just the first year of my life. But I didn't have a connection with the US. And he was the one who pushed me, and he was like, well, I'll pay for, this application, and if you get in, great. If you don't, then don't. But I had to apply for a scholarship because I was like, I can't pay for SVA, and we got a scholarship, and eventually I got another scholarship. But if it wasn't for my dad, the veterinarian, I mean, he didn't want me to be anything else but an artist. My mother was an artist. My grandfather's German. He was an artist too. So that was always promoted in my family, but I had no clue what it was either to show up in New York. I went there when I was still 17. I started.
Wow.
Yeah, I started when I was 17. I had never lived by myself in my life, and New York was my first experience. So it was
wow.
Yeah, it was something. I'm sure LA was, California, West Coast is very, very different also, but yeah, it was very strange for me too. But did you know about American illustration? Because I grew up when I grew up. I guess my brother, I had an older brother, and he lived like 10 years, those 10 years in the US with my parents. So a lot of the stuff that he brought with him, like he brought comic books and books of Frank Frazetta. And so it was a lot of like, sci-fi illustration, fantastical illustration. And that's kind of what I grew up, I grew up with these books and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And eventually when I was a little bit older, like I realized who Rockwell was, who Leyendecker was, these amazing illustrators. Did you have any sort of idea of what American illustration was about, or was it just like, oh, I just love illustration because it's the images that accompany, the words, like the cool images that are, the accompaniment of words.
Um, no, I didn't have any idea about American illustration, and I'm really happy I learned about it. See, the thing was like when I don't know how it was about for you, but for me, like like the classic nerdy, quiet kid who couldn't connect with anybody really, and or like I think people would have connected to me, like I just didn't realize that they would. You know what I mean? Like I was too. So and drawing was something that I've did to kind of make sense of the world for myself since I can remember. Like there's drawings that my mom kept of, like where she said, like I was sitting in my room as early as I could hold a pencil and making all kinds of sounds and doing like these elaborate scenes of fights or whatever, good against evil. I don't remember. So it's been always something that was second nature to me and that I was doing. And I was so absorbed in making things that I spent very little time actively searching stuff out if it didn't come across my way naturally, if you know what I mean.
Do you remember the things that came across your way like naturally, like those images that probably spurred your imagination?
Right. So obviously, like I was very influenced by European comic books, like the French style comic books, Hergé and Franquin and Derzo, obviously Maurice, all these people, right? So that was were the things that I looked at. And then I remember we had these very beautifully illustrated fairy tale books. I was endlessly flipping through those, just looking at illustrations that were in there. So those really were like my first inspirations, and and I just started drawing, and I started doing portraits of my grandparents who were all already dead by the time I was alive. And I guess it was like some kind of way trying to make a connection with these people that I've never met, but that knew that they had something to do with me. So yeah, like that's how it started. And because it was something that was always so second nature to me, and I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about, because it never occurred to me that it could be something more than a hobby that I had while I was a teenager. And I never took it that seriously until I left for the US and started studying it, and then I started taking it very seriously.
You were saying how the Ruprecht from now, if you saw those paintings that you did when you were younger, it's not that you wouldn't approve, but what do you think has changed? If I know it's probably hard to kind of synthetically say, these are the very few things that have changed, but how do you understand, the work that you did? I'm guessing when you were like mid-20s to what you're doing now.
Wow, that's a really hard question. I think, like I don't know how about you, because I know you teach a lot and you have a lot of contact with young painters. But every time I speak with young aspiring painters, you sort of realize again how hard it is starting out painting
Mm.
and getting it to work. And I think a lot of it is just experience,
Mm.
right? And putting the mileage in.
Mm.
And there's a lot you can make up for just by the drive you have when you're younger and the just sheer willpower. Like you want to make it and you want to make a painting. And um, I mean, it sort of reminds me a little bit of. I've heard an interview recently with Salman Rushdie where he was talking about his latest book, and he said that he can now write a book in a tenth of the time that it took him when he was
Mm.
writing his first books,
Mhm.
just because he now knows his own process much better and understands how he has to approach everything. And I think that's mainly what I remember, that I was struggling with idiotic details sometimes, right? Making the classic mistake of starting trying to get an eye right and not realizing that I could spend a week trying to get a face or an eye, but like if it's not embedded into any composition, it's
Doesn't
essentially
matter.
meaningless, right?
Yeah.
It's like, trying to get one chord on the guitar right, but if it's not part of a song, like it's just not music.
Do you think that there are things that you've kept that you recognize that, aside from that drive and aside from that kind of imaginarium that you've always had, do you think that there's something that has been able to, to carry on throughout, what it is for you, probably over 20-25 years of painting?
Yeah, there's definitely elements that I've stayed true to and that have carried all the way through and that were always important to me. For one, it's figures. Like I'm just interested in the human shape, and there's a whole array of reasons for that. Um, then I've always, and that actually goes back to high school. I've always tried to not use photo references or models. Like I've always had like the stubborn idea that I had to be able to make up all my images from my imagination. Everything else was cheating, and that has become second nature as well, and is something that carries through till today.
You do realize that that is, for a lot of people, that is something, and I'm going to include myself because I'm actually kind of, I guess frustrated would be the word, that when I was younger, it's perfect that the way that you describe drawings, these drawings of good and evil, because I think that that's entirely what I did. I don't know if it has to do with us being a product of time and everything that you would see in television, or we had like a lot of Japanese shows here in South America, which is very, very strange. Why? Because it doesn't make sense. But it was always like heroes against these villains. And in my mind, I always associated like, yeah, this is my fight of good and evil. And if I had toys, I would always put them in two teams, and I would do like, it's almost like I was doing like UEFA, elimination groups, and I would always have the last two, my favorite toys, my favorite, good guy against my favorite evil guy fighting off in the end. But you know, th- that is exactly what I would do. I would just concentrate on doing these two powers that be, kind of fight it out. And I think I always knew what the result would be. I always knew who would win between those two, but I still would have this fight. But what I'm getting is that when I was younger, I had this almost free flowing imagination that I equated imagination with being boundless, with being able to just create any world I wanted. Like if I wanted this monster to have 8 different arms and each of them had like a different weapon, like that was perfect. That was perfectly fine. And and if this hero had to be anthropomorphic and it had to be super weird, then that was totally fine too. And I think I miss having that sense of liberty because when I started learning, I think the learning part of, unfortunately, drawing or painting almost clashed with that idea that I had in my mind of drawing from imagination is not necessarily competing with nature. You don't have to paint something or draw something exactly as it is in nature because that's not the objective. If you want to paint something from nature, then just paint it from nature. That's If you want to try and be faithful, then just look at it and paint it, and that's fine. But what I understood when I was a kid, I think, was that I didn't have to compete with nature. I was just kind of like world building, and I think I've lost some of that. I don't want to say like it's gone, but because I am very playful with the way I think I approach painting. But I think that that's something that's gone. And I don't know if you're familiar with Kim Jung-gi. He's a Korean illustrator, and his drawing ability is just, I mean, absurd. It's incredible. It's something that a lot of people, even for myself, it's hard to understand. It's hard to almost like rationalize because he draws, I mean, amazingly from his head. He has this visual memory that is actually quite outstanding. And I think that, and I can imagine this kind of bugging you also, the fact that people will tell you, oh, you wouldn't, it's not true that you're able to do this from your head, or there's no way you can do that from imagination. But I almost treat it as our own kind of shortcoming or our own misunderstanding of what it is to actually know how to conceive imagination, how to understand what it is to make worlds that don't necessarily have to be rational or to have to compete with like the laws of nature. And I think people like you or people like Kim Jung-gi, you really understand that. Like you have that understanding that this is your world. Like you are creating the rules, in your paintings. And perhaps for us that see it as something that is so almost far-fetched to try and understand, it's because I don't know. I think we have a leg on nature. We have a leg on this rationale, view of the universe, and it's hard to comprehend because I think that if you start from nature, it's really almost impossible to understand how that would produce what you do. But if you start from your own, imagination and from your own visual imaginarium, then it is obviously conceivable that you can do every single thing that you do.
Yeah, you know what? I was watching the other day like a short film about a perfect pitch in musicians, and there's certain musicians who, like, if you tell them, okay, like, sing a scale, they can sing it, and you can afterwards lay a piano underneath it, and every tone will be just perfect, right? Which seems to be very rare amongst musicians, even like very good musicians. Sometimes some have it, some others don't, and it's not necessarily that it makes one musician better than another. It's just a different way of feeling it and seeing it, and I think that's to me, like it's the not using any reference and doing everything from your head. It's also can be a huge hindrance, and it's not necessarily like just a good skill to have, and yeah, I'm it's just for me it seems sometimes more that I'm just too stupid to edit things when I'm looking at them live. You know what I mean? Because painting something from live, and one can tell really beautifully from the work that you do. Like one of the paintings that I've really, really loved the last year, I think you posted it, was like a plastic bag with coins in it.
Yes.
I thought it was just really a terrific, beautiful study from life, and it illustrated perfectly what that editing process, like the translation of all those reflections and surfaces into brushstrokes that then reassemble to become the thing that you've seen. And I guess I'm just too stupid to do that. So, for me, it seemed always easier to kind of tweak the world and make it fit to my imagination. So maybe it's actually like a lack of fantasy rather than anything else. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's incredible that you understand it as hindrance. I think that would take people aback because if anything, I think that for the people like me that really appreciate what you do is that feeling that you don't seem to be tied by anything. So it's so I always find it fascinating how artists see themselves as opposed to how other artists see them. But I'm always
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that like interesting as a question in itself, right? Because for once, like what you've just touched upon is that other people see us differently than we see ourselves, right?
Mhm.
Because we live in our skin and we can't have an objective view of who we are or how we work, right? Like it's just the way we've always done it, or that it's just us. And there's no way to get out of that perspective, which I find very interesting, but also maddening, right? Like we're stuck with our vision. And the other thing is, over the years teaching, I've noticed that a lot of students super early on get super concerned with style and finding their own style and their own voice. And I'm always saying to them, like, chill out, like it'll come, like you'll stumble over it. Because for me, style actually is more defined by the things you can't do. You know what I mean? Like style is sort of defined by the limitations that you can't push up against. Yeah, like there's certain limits you can work on, but there's just limits to how you can push yourself into a direction that is just not you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Just the way in which you can fight like tooth and nail to try and get out of a problem. I think that those are probably some of the most interesting ways to solve images. When you realize that artists, as we are human beings and we all have shortcomings, but when you realize that with very little variables they were able to solve these sometimes just unmanageable problems, and you go like, wow, that's their inventiveness, I think, or just the struggle to try and work through something. I think that in that solving process, that's when amazing things happen. So yeah, I try to almost, I mean, it's a word that you hear, and if you keep in contact with like illustration, it's a word that you hear like a ton. And I think it's a very unfortunate word. I feel that it's a very like empty word. People don't realize that in the way in which we understand style, it is something that can be so superficially copied. Like if you just want to, mimic the surface area that is in any sort of image, you can do that so easily. But yeah, but people don't want to hear that that surface is the result of everything that's bubbling like underneath, all the problems and that are causing everything that has to be solved through images that are underneath. So yeah, that's very cool that you understand it that way, that you see it that way.
Yeah, it's true. And I think another thing about what you were saying about surfaces and what's bubbling underneath, right? Like, I think what really makes the difference is what you have to say and do you have anything to say, right? Because like anybody can make a painting that has a beautiful surface, but it's if there's no idea behind it that's makes it interesting in the long run, it's going to be a pretty boring thing, right? And so in the end, like, I think it's the idea that makes it special. And with that, I don't mean like there has to be like a super deep, crazy concept, but yeah, I mean, it can be just the idea of showing somebody the beauty of a bag of coins, right? That sometimes can be enough of an idea, and then it has to be the idea that you have with the way it's executed has to be in a has to harmonize, right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's just falls flat and it's sort of dead.
Yeah. Do you?
And what I mean by that is, if it like I'm sure you're just as much a fan of John Singer Sargent as I am, but I don't know, like, if you've ever had the chance to see his painting in the Imperial War Museum in London.
Yes. Yes.
He has like a huge mural there.
Mhm.
Remember about gas soldiers walking up to
Yeah,
a dressing station, and they're all blinded by poison gas, and they have bands around their eyes and sort of holding onto the shoulders of the person in front of them.
Hmm.
And it's sort of supposed to be this painting that shows you this whole how terrible this war was, right? But I think this is actually one of the paintings where Sargent, in my eyes at least, failed miserably because his style didn't go along with it. You know, like for me, like when I saw the painting, I thought like, wow, it's like a stunning painting. It's beautifully executed. But in the end, it has like the sensibility of a Benetton commercial, you know, from years back. You know, like when they had these commercials that were supposed to be edgy, but then at the same time they were beautiful and very aesthetic, right? And like it has the same thing. It's supposed to show this terrible scene, but all the soldiers are like pretty and they're relatively clean, and you know, like their uniforms are still all like pressed, and it all has like that chicness and that glamour of his paintings of high society people. And it just, in my eyes, like his style and his way of painting clashes so much that with the subject matter that they kind of deaden each other, and in the end, like it got me to walk out of there and shrug my shoulders, which I don't do when I see a society portrait of Sargent, where his style is just so perfect, right?
But that's the artist that he was. I mean, and you bring up like a super cool point, because it was obvious that he wasn't the painter to paint that painting. I mean, he's obviously capable of executing, you know, a beautiful painting. And I would agree with you. When you see that painting, it's a beautiful painting, but it's never gut wrenching. It would never be this sort of imagery that people say, oh, this is mustard gas. This is one of the most horrible things that we have invented, that we decided as humanity to say, no, you know, even us as humans, we are not that, you know, we are not animals. We are going to prohibit this from war. You know, it is not a painting that says, my God, look at the disasters of war. You know, we have to rethink this, you know, this horrible nature that it is, you know, part of us as human beings. No, I also saw it, and it's almost impossible when you look at a Sargent not to see it as, you know, as a painting, as, you know, not to be interested in the way it's executed as a painting. And but if you think about Sargent, he had a very, you know, comfortable life. I mean, I'm sure he had the suffering that comes from life, from being alive. You know, I'm sure he just wasn't this happy person that painted gleefully and did these beautiful, you know, images. I'm sure he suffered like every other human being could suffer.
Maybe he was. Maybe there are these people.
But you know, but he's not a, you know, he wasn't like a war correspondent. He wasn't one of these painters that, you know, that you kind of know that they went, you know, to war and they tried to at least have some sensible idea of what was going on there. I'm not saying that. I don't know if you're familiar with Ivor Helly, the Australian painter. He's a very good painter too, and I think
I don't know
he's contemporary to Sargent, but he has war paintings, and they feel like he was there because he was there. You know, he he actually was there. And there's a very, very big difference. But that actually, I was going to ask you, like, I'm not saying that Sargent didn't have the right to paint those things, and this was probably a commission of some sorts. I don't know exactly if somebody commissioned specifically this piece.
Well, like if I recall it right, like from reading what they have in the Imperial War Museum, I think it was actually sent to the front lines by the War Department, and he actually made sketches there and drawings, and then took that home and painted the painting in his studio. But
right,
like I don't think it's a question of him having the
No, I was trying to get to that point, and I think you're going there. But do you think that as painters, there has to be some sort of deep connection with what you are painting? Like it has to. I don't like to say the word belongs to us, but that we feel some sort of kinship with, like that there is this deeper connection with what we do, because in my mind, like I always know that the experiences that spur a painting, if they are personal, like if we can count with information that other people can't count with, that obviously is going to be part of a work of art. But as an artist, I've always believed that there shouldn't be any rules to art. Like we should be capable of doing whatever we want, and it is on our onus to say we can tackle a problem and we can do a good job, or we can do a horrible job. We can actually take those liberties and produce a terrible work of art. But I much rather live with no restrictions, in the sense that I don't want some power to be to say, well, you shouldn't have painted that. That's not yours. But there are moral problems sometimes that go like, well, this doesn't really belong to you. Like, this is something where this is a conversation that does not take place in your universe, and you shouldn't have painted that. Do you? I mean, it's a hard question. I think it's a super, super tough question, and I don't think there's like a binary answer to this. But how do you feel about that? Like, do you feel there are things that we are supposed to talk about, and there are things that are kind of off limits?
Well, you know what? Like, I think that's an incredibly complicated and complex bucket to jump into. That opens all kinds of doors that the conversation could go into, but I think we'd still be sitting here at 6 a.m. my time and your time, like sometimes lunchtime. But I don't know, like I'm going to try to take it back to Sargent really quickly, because I don't think it's an issue of he didn't have a right to paint it, or I don't even want to say he buggered it up. Like it was just his way of seeing the world, and of his way of capturing what he saw. And aside from that, like there's the contemporaries viewers perspective that you bring into that painting, right? Like where you like how horrific this war has been, and that it has nothing glorious, nothing heroic about it. It was just pure human misery, really, in almost every respect. And with that knowledge and coming to the painting with that perspective, it just seemed to fall flat, right? But it had to do sort of with my expectations that when I want to see like it's such a big painting about a subject matter like World War I, I have the expectation that I'm not being shown how heroic and that war was. And then obviously as a German, right, like I've seen images of how Georges Grosz or Otto Dix have captured images of war, right? And if you see those paintings, like especially Dix's paintings about World War I, they're literally gut-wrenching, right? Like he did the whole thing about, rotting corpses and people sitting on a corpse with rats coming out of the eye sockets, eating their lunch, filthy from top to bottom. And like they've shown the whole unfiltered there's nothing heroic or beautiful about it. And at the same time, the paintings are stunningly beautiful, right? Like, but I also like wanted to come back to something you were saying, um, that as a painter you can't be but attracted to how a painting is executed. But I think for me, one sign of a really good painting is when I first get really drawn in by what the painting has to say, and only in the third or fourth time that I've kind of getting into the painting and looking at it, I'm starting to notice how beautifully it's executed, or how, how there's painterly qualities that really attract me. You know what I mean? But if the painting at first grabs me by grabs me right there, right? Grabs my heart, then it's not the first read that it's executed brilliantly. I think that's, to me, always sort of a letdown, because I think that wears off really quick, right? Like when people say, "Oh wow, like this painting is beautifully executed," or actually, to me, like I know that I've failed with a painting when the only comment I get from somebody is like, "Oh wow, this looks just like a photograph." Like, yeah, but that's a party trick. Like I didn't mean to paint like a photograph. Like then I failed to get across the point that I was trying to actually make, and that wasn't that I can paint like a photo.
Yeah, so I completely understand that in image making, the responsibility of a powerful image is to, and this is, I love illustration, and in illustration the impact has to be immediate. Like if an illustration is great, you have to consume it in like this nanosecond. It has to do its job very, very efficiently. And, I guess efficiently is a word that I would tie with illustration, and not necessarily to art. Sometimes art requires, I don't want to make differences between those two, by the way, because I sometimes feel they're far, far closer than, or they share way more things than, people want to understand them to be as separate languages. But I guess,
I agree.
I guess when looking at a painting in a museum or in a setting where time is of no relevance, in the sense that you can create a space of contemplation, that you can stay there for an hour or 3 days or a month, every day you go look at this painting for a month, or you look at it through this stay that you have, in this city with this museum, and then you go back 10 years later and you keep looking at it. Like that space that painting creates, I feel it's very native to painting, and it's very, very particular to painting. But I guess in illustration, a good illustration always has a job to do. It always has to, communicate something with a lot of efficacy. And I like that. I like that there's this very powerful punch, that can be delivered through a great illustration. It's not necessarily how I measure, some of the paintings that I've, that I consider to be some of the greatest paintings ever. Like even some of the painters that I've come to love are painters that I didn't really care about when I was younger, or that I thought, never in my life would I honestly find them interesting. Like, for example, for me, Whistler. Whistler is a painter that I never thought that I could like. And only after reading how much of an idiot, because he was this big pompous, ego, as big of an ego as he could be, but he was just incredibly intelligent. And as soon as I could see him in as much as a context that I could see him, I started, for some reason, seeing his paintings differently. I don't know what changed, in me. But now I think some of Whistler's like Nocturnes are some of the most beautiful paintings that I've ever seen. And I've been able to see them physically, and they move me almost like to tears. And that to me is something that's absurdly exciting about the relationship that you can establish with painting. The fact that, it transforms with you. The way you see something at first, it doesn't necessarily have to be the reality of that image that carries over to, future viewings of that particular, in our case, painting. Do you look at a lot of contemporary art, or contemporary painting maybe? Like, what do you enjoy looking at, if you do? Like, if you're not very interested, that's obviously totally fine. But
Um, you know what? Like I look at all kinds of stuff. Obviously, like things that colleagues in Berlin make, and um, old stuff, new stuff. But to be quite honest, like I've still, in a lot of ways, I'm still the teenager. Like I'm so interested in doing my own thing and doing my paintings that I feel that's what I want to spend most or all of my time on, right? And so I'm still mainly concerned with making my images, and I've and the other thing is, like, I think that there's like a real danger sometimes in looking at too much other people's work. I remember, like, one time I was in London, and there was like a beautiful little retrospective of of Lucian Freud portraits at the National Portrait Gallery. And I came back, and like the next painting I did after being at the exhibition, like I felt like the whole time I was trying to do a Lucian Freud. Because I was so fascinated by these paintings and I loved them so much, and I wanted to get some of those compositorial qualities in there that he has. But you know what? Like, I was thinking while you were talking about Whistler, because he happens to be one of my favorite artists as well, and I think it's a very good illustration. If like, he has all these paintings that are called like composition in brown, or composition in gray, or composition in white, right? And I love the whole idea, because when you look at them, that's exactly what I get out of it, right? That I don't marvel at, oh, is this like a pretty woman, or is it skillfully painted? But I marvel at, wow, this is insane how he got out of such a narrow range of colors so much variation and liveliness and a working composition. Because when you're a painter, you just realize how darn difficult that is to pull off. And in that sense, like, it seems like he was playing pool, and he told me where the ball was going to go, and it went into exactly that socket, right? Like, he said, like, he was going to make a composition in brown, and that's exactly what he did, and he succeeded. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I was aiming for, right? That I admire that, and it's, to me, it's like a more lasting satisfaction than just looking at somebody where you say, like, well, like, it's just, I have to admire the skill, but and that's sort of a bad sign. Like, when I come with a but, like, I don't understand what the painting is all about, or it's just like, I think there's the hazard of just showing off skill as well.
Right.
That can be there, especially in figurative art.
Right. That I mean, I still consider myself to be, even though I made that sacrifice a long time ago, and I'm not patting myself on the back, because it was actually a very, very hard thing to do, and I question every day if it was a good decision. But I used to collect art books, like, hundreds of art books, and it was the one thing that I think, when I was studying, I would spend every bit of money that I could get just by doing whatever works I was doing. I was always like, okay, I need to put something aside to go, after class and have a beer, and I need to put something aside to buy art materials, and I definitely need my, my chunk of change to buy some books. I even remember there was one time when I was studying that I had no money. I think I went, like, it was going to be like 2 days without eating anything. I was super, super proud of, I didn't like to ask anyone for help, and I didn't want to, like, burden anyone. And I had to go to Strand, which was a used bookstore in New York, and I had to take like, I don't know how many books I took, maybe 6 or 8 books that I loved all my books, but I was like, okay, I think I can part with these. And I took them there and they gave me like $64, something like that. And I was like, great, this is money I need. But at the same time, I was devastated. I was like completely devastated that I had to sell my books. Now, that's the love I've always had for particularly art books. But, flash forward to, years later, and I have my really nice art collection. And I think this will exemplify perfectly what I'm trying to say. But I had 2 books of yours. And I ordered your last one, so maybe this didn't really work at all. But I had 2 books of yours. The one that does all the, I would say, monochrome paintings of the animals, the ones that are, that book,
Yeah.
and then the other one that has the girl with the yellow coat, with the raincoat, that has the painting with the yeah. So I had those 2 books, which were hard to get, by the way, and I loved those books. I loved them. I don't want to gush. I don't want to sound like I'm gushing, and I'm really trying not to sound like I'm super fanboy here. I'm trying to keep my cool. But I always loved what you were doing, because for me, you were like this perfect meeting of illustration and, painting, whatever that means. But I always sensed that you wanted to tell a story. And I'm going to be completely honest. I was like, I don't care about this story. All I know is that these beings have this existential angst to do something, to play this role, whatever role that, they're playing. I have no idea what it was, but it feels like they had to either jump, or they had to be in this weird pose, in this, I don't know, floating boat, whatever it was. They just felt like they were determined to repeat this ritual, whatever it was. So I always felt that was amazing, but I was like, I have no idea what, these things are about. And honestly, I still, in the best way possible, Ruprecht, and I hope you take this the right way, like, I don't care to know, because I don't need to know. Like, I want to play by the rules that you propose in a painting, but I don't really need to try and see them as something that I have to figure out, or I have to get into your brain and try to see exactly what you figured out. I don't. I'm like, I feel perfectly fine just being a passenger in your paintings, and just, looking at this world and just saying, okay, I believe this world. Like, to me, that's the greatest, one of the greatest signs of a painting is that you are helpless when you look at the painting. You tell, even though you have your ego and your belief system, and you carry all those things with you all the time. But whenever you look at a strong painting, it's almost like you are liberated from those things, and now you are part of this painting. Now, obviously, the way we perceive a painting, the way our perception works, is shaped by all of our experiences, and we always carry that with us. But there is something about just looking at something, at a powerful painting, and saying, oh yeah, I'm here for the ride. Just take me anywhere you want to take me. And that's something that I always loved about your work. But, I'm coming to the tough part of this story, is that I decided at some point in my life to sell, not to sell, to give my books away. And at the time I was working at the fine arts faculty at the university, and this is a big university, really, really big university. Like, they could have purchased all the books that I had. I had like almost like 450 something books. And they could have, bought those books easily. They wouldn't have made a dent in them. But I tried to give it to them. I was like, I love all these students that I've worked with throughout the years. I want to give these books to the university. I want to gift them to the library. And they were like, well, we still have to evaluate them, and you still have to send us like this list of all the of every single book, every ISBN, every author. And we're going to have to check, and we're going to have to check the quality of the books. And I was like, they're art books. I keep them like pristine quality, like they're perfect. And they were like, no, but we need all of that. And I was like, and forgive me, I was like, oh, fuck this. I was like, or forget it. I've been working here. I love my students. I love this place. So what I did was I called my old school, which is where my son goes to, and I told them I have all these art books, and they have a really nice library there. I mean, it's a very humble school, so the library is very, very old, but I still have a lot of affection for my old school, and this is the school I went for 12 years. So here in Colombia, we only go to like a school for like 12 years. It's like a single school.
Right.
So I told them about it, and they were like, "Yeah, we'll take them. We'll send a truck like right away." And they sent like this, this nice, well, not nice, this truck, and with these two guys, and they was like, "Yeah, just give us the books, and we'll haul them over to the library." And that's what I ended up doing. And your two books were ones that I gave to the library because, I mean, I love you. I love, your work, but it was bad for me. It was terrible for me because the more I looked at it, the more I kind of understood myself, from you. I was like, oh, fuck, I'm never going to be this painter that I want to be because I'm so far from doing the things that you're capable of doing. Or, it's this thing that you convince yourself like, I wanted to do this painting, and now suddenly fucking Ruprecht is doing this painting amazing, and now I can't do it because he did it, 10,000 times better than I would have ever been able to do it. So that's the place you occupied in my brain. And I was like, I have to let them go. I really do. I have to let them go in the best of ways. Like, it's still in my mind. I'm like, if one student in my school gets to see one of those books and it kind of sparks something in them, I'm like, hell yeah, that's amazing. Because, I'm also going to be honest. I know that there's internet nowadays, but it's very tough to look for artwork. And I mean, especially here, I would say here in Colombia, like, it's not like you go in your everyday life and you're bombarded by all these, notions of contemporary painting, of what contemporary painting looks like. No, you kind of have to actually look for it. So I always have this fantasy in my head that hopefully, out of those hundreds of books, somebody's going to pick up a book and say, wow, this is incredible. And it's just going to make them do whatever. They don't have to be a painter. Like, I could care less if that spurs painting, but just that their imagination just keeps going. So like you did with Freud, and I'm guessing you had some sort of, reverence for him the same way I do. I think he's absolutely brilliant, but that reverence quickly turns into, oh my God, how the hell do I take this guy off my head? Because it's not helpful anymore. Like, this is not good anymore. You were that for me. So thank you for ruining years of my life.
Well, thank you. That's probably like one of the biggest compliment a painter could get. But yeah, to be quite honest, like what you were saying about how you were approaching my books, that's exactly like how I would want my audience to be, right? That you look at the paintings, you can't figure out what the hell is going on, but it doesn't matter that you can't figure it out because you, like, all it's about is that you get a certain emotion from it, and you get that sense of people being driven to do something that doesn't make any sense, or doesn't seem to make any sense, but you can tell that they're really obsessed trying to do that very thing. And like, to me, that has a lot of connection to our real world, because I feel a lot of things that we do and that we pursue with a lot of passion, and I mean humans in general, not painters necessarily, are things that if people would look at them from the outside or several hundred years later, they'd be like, why the hell were they doing that? Like, what obsessed them, right? Like, we looking back at history at some every now and then, and we're like, what was going on? What were people thinking? And sometimes these changes come so quickly. Like, I think you've got children too, right? Mm-hmm. And when I was a kid, like, there weren't like my dad was always being made fun of because we actually had safety belts in the back of our cars.
Mhm.
Like my dad drove a Volvo, and he just picked it for safety reasons. And all my friends obviously would make fun of, oh yeah, like you're driving Volvo, is the most ugly car in the world. But um, and nowadays, like it's inconceivable that anybody would pack their kid without a booster seat and safety belts and I don't know, like what other precautions into a
Right.
car, right? Like, and if you see friends doing it, you're like, what the hell are you doing, man? Like, when do you live, right? So like the behavior of our parents seems really bizarre already
Mhm.
to us looking back at it, and that's what I'm trying to essentially, to put it into a nutshell, to do with my paintings. That you look at them and they sort of look familiar, but at the same time you're like, why the hell? Like this,
Mm.
like these people are nuts. They're crazy. Like why are they being so obsessive about it? Um, so that's sort of like what I'm always aiming for, that feeling, right? Like of looking in from the outside. And I love the story that you told about the art books, because I know exactly that feeling, and I get that feeling really quickly looking at art that I like. And to me, like it's makes it really hard looking at other people's art, because either it's so good that it gives me the same feeling you were describing, that you're like, ah, damn, why, like, why would I want to paint a painting about this anymore? Like, it's been done so much better. Or
Mhm.
um, it it actually really ticks me off, and I'm like, why the hell is like anybody bothering putting this stupid picture up on a wall? You know what I mean? So it's and there's I think it's probably good that there's no in between, but like art either really makes me sort of that it throws me out of little um, my little universe, and it really confuses me of about why I'm even supposed to be painting, or it really makes me angry, because bad art makes me angry. And see, like the funny thing is, like I've also got a story about books, because I actually really, really love books, but I've hardly ever bought art books. I've got like a big library of um, just literature,
Mhm.
because I love reading stories, and I love how, um, yeah, because I'm not like a writer, and I don't have the the spoiler effect of being able to look behind the scenes. I can let myself completely be absorbed by the story.
Mm.
And I love that about books. Um, and I've also hauled these books around over several moves, and there's even like a whole bunch of books that are bought in the States, that are brought all the way back from the States. Like I
Mm.
put them on a ship and brought them back. Um, and similar like you, like I'm thinking if it's time to let go of these books. But like I was wondering, actually, has like what made you decide that it's time to let go of the books?
I have a very it's a very dumb little story, but it is true, which is that before that, I love photography. I love to take photographs, and I think that, well, I always think of myself that if I wasn't a painter, I was going to be a sculptor, and if I wasn't a sculptor, I was going to be a photographer. But I absolutely adore photography. I even spent like thousands of dollars on eBay trying to get wet plate cameras, like Russian lenses from like a century ago, to do wet plate collodion. I don't know if you've seen what wet plate collodion looks like, but it's this beautiful, beautiful way to take photographs. And I actually did that some years ago. So I do have this very deep connection with the photographic image, and you know, I I I started being very involved in taking photographs when my kids were born. When my when my first son was born, when Samu was born. And I took a bunch of photographs of him. I even took photographs of, him. I was on the back. People always think that I'm like Americans that, have a camcorder like pointed to the woman's uterus, and that's totally fine in the US. But no, I was like on the other side because they don't let you. But I saw my kid's head just kind of, there was this bed sheet, and, I remember the hands of the doctor just kind of pushing out my son's head. And I had this perfect photo of that moment. And I was like, it was amazing. It was amazing. And from that moment on, I started taking tons of photographs of my son. And then 4 years later, I kept taking photographs of him, for 4 years. And then 4 years later, my daughter was born, and I did the same thing. And it was amazing. And I was super careful about it. Like, I had in my computer, I had two hard disks that I kept as a ¿cómo se dice? As a backup. So this is going to sound ridiculous, but you probably know where this story is going now. But at some point, I had them in my hard drive, in my regular hard drive, and that was fine. And then one of the hard drives died, and I was like, oh, what happened? Like, what the hell happened? And I had somebody come over and look at it, and he's like, no, it's, hard drives are physical. Like, they spin and they have this life, and they are, they are bound to die at some point. And I was like, okay, that's totally fine. I still have my backup and my hard drive. And long story short, and this was in a period of a couple of weeks. It wasn't even like a month. And it speaks about my neglect for trying to back up all this information. But I always told myself, those pictures are there. And eventually the other backup drive also died. And I became like super nervous. And while I was trying to find a way to see if they can fix that or if they could extract all the information, my computer died and my hard drive died. And it makes sense because I actually built that computer and I put those drives together at the same time. And I guess, after whatever it was, 6-7 years, they just died. And at that point, it was like complete desperation for me. I remember feeling like this was one of the most horrible things that had happened to me in my life, because I equated those images with experiences, with those moments in my children's lives. And those, I told myself, they're gone now. Like, they have just disappeared. And I eventually had somebody over, and they took the drive and they analyzed it. And it was going to be like $1,500 to try to, it was going to take months because they have to put needles in this drive and try to extract like bits of information and then try to reconfigure those bits. So they can never tell you like that they could extract like all the images that were there. Some images were probably corrupted, and it was going to be $1,500. And I remember just feeling like,
wow,
I don't know if life is telling me like it's not like this is the price that you would have to pay because you didn't back up your images. But I took it as, wow, this is kind of absurd. This is what would cost to just have the hope of maybe recovering some of these files. And I, at that point, told myself, I'm probably more concerned about these photographs. I mean, this is not true, but I was probably more concerned about these photographs. And I was going to say than my kids, than, my physical kids, but that's not true. Like, I've always cared for my kids. I love my kids. I completely adore my kids. But I was feeling like something was missing. And I convinced myself, I told myself, your kids are right there. Like, you don't have to take photographs for them to serve as evidences of them being, part of your life. They're right there. You can just, play with them and do anything. So my life just kind of switched over. Like, if I went to a sandlot, to like a sandbox with my kid, like, I remember I would always lug my, Canon camera with like a portrait lens. And I started not doing that. I started just going to the sandbox and just playing with my kid and just, being there and having a good time. And then have nothing to prove, that I had a good time, which is a very, Instagram, social media generation, that if you don't show a picture, it didn't happen. If you're not there, like I remember when I would go, travel, I would go to all these amazing, places in the world, but I never took selfies. I always hated selfies. I never liked, me in a picture. I always thought, I'm going to ruin that picture. Like, I'm looking at this. I want people, to realize, or I want to have a memory of what I'm looking. I don't care for people to know that I'm here. But I would take all these pictures. And I remember it was one time my sisters would tell me, how do we know that you were there? These could be pictures from these could be anyone's photographs. How do we really know that you were there? And I realized that I had this disconnect between wanting to experience something and evidencing something. So I totally gave it up. I mean, I still take photographs and I'm still fine with it. But I'm the sort of person that if I go to a football game, I would never take my cell phone out. And I don't judge people that, if you want to take it out, fine, go crazy. If I go to well, not nowadays, but if I go to a concert, I'm there to listen and to experience. I'm not there to record it. Who cares? But I'm that sort of person. Like, I want to be in that moment. And I think books started feeling like all this weight that I was carrying. Like, I imagined myself like this hermit crab, and I would have to lug all these things around to remember those experiences. And I don't know if it's right or wrong. I don't know if there's a way to answer this as what I did was being right or wrong. It just felt right at the moment. But nowadays I just what I try to do, for example, if I go to, well, not nowadays, but when I had the chance to travel or to go to a show or a museum, like, I'm super, super present. And I try to remember when I step out, like, I give myself whatever time I need to have the experience that I have, that I want to have, let's say, in front of a painting. And when I leave, I always try to tell myself, like, what did you get from this? Like, what is it that you took from this? And I try to be super, super not punctual, but I try to be very particular about the thing that I want to carry with me, because those things don't weigh anything. That's what I kind of understood in the end, that when if you read a book and you close it up, and it's not that you don't have to read it again, you can't read it again. No. Like, I've, this kind of cliche, but I've read Les Miserables probably 3 times. And every time I read it, it is my favorite book of all time. And I know that I could read that book until the day I die, and I'm going to always find it fascinating. But it's not quite about just revisiting like a story. It's just the stuff that you carry with you, and how I don't want to be kind of tethered to the object itself or the information itself. And I much rather want to carry how I feel about, or what I gathered from that experience. And that is the one that is actually useful. That was very helpful with you, not to see your paintings as how are they painted? Like, oh, how is he using like a primary color palette, or is he using this medium? Or like, I cared about those things because I think that that's my instinctual painter side. But eventually I didn't care about those things. Like, I'm totally fine with you paint however the way you paint, but what I have to carry with me is just another different sense of your painting, that is something that I can actually use, that I can actually kind of transcribe to my life and say, okay, this can be something that can help me, in the future. And so I think it's those two experiences, those two moments. One moment led to the other, but yeah, basically that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's really bizarre about the different motivations that people have to take pictures, right? Like, it sometimes seems that an experience only becomes real if you put it in form of a photograph. Mm-hmm. And it leads to these really bizarre situations. Like, I remember in Norway seeing the Scream for the first time. Mm-hmm. And you come into the room where the screen is, and you can't look at the painting because there's like 3 busloads of tourists in front of it who all go through the same dance. Like none of them actually looks at the painting. They all place themselves in front of the painting, one of them taking a picture and the other one mimicking a scream. And then they swap
Yeah.
places, and the other one takes the same picture. And then the next couple comes, and the next couple comes, and the next couple comes. And you're wondering, like, like what your sisters, I think, were saying, like, how do we know you were really there? I mean, how do you know you were really there when you take a selfie that's been done like a million times, right? Like there's like, I don't know if you heard about this news story about this Indian couple that got busted doing fake photographs of themselves on the top of Mount Everest. So they've never been there, but they've got the selfie to prove that they I guess haven't been there. So it becomes this really bizarre thing. And I agree, like for me, like I've never been like a big fan of taking photographs, because it was always like this act that you do that sort of takes you out of experiencing a situation, at least if it's like family
Mm.
photographs, which always sort of bugged me. But maybe it's just laziness, I don't know. And it's also true, like I think there can be something really cleansing and cathartic about giving up on things that you surround yourself with, that you take as markers of that seem to symbolize who you are as a person, right? And
Mm.
oftentimes they're part of who you've become, but like I don't know, like how they change much of who you are now. And
Mm.
I've noticed that, I don't know, like I've been a terrible person about looking back. I'm always sort of looking forward. Um, I think to a fault, actually. I've noticed from friends who told me stories from like when I was studying, and I'm like, oh yeah, hell yeah, we did that. Like I completely forgot about that. Like I had no recollection
Mhm.
of these actually very funny and wonderful situations. They've just slipped from my mind, and it's a lot about this childhood memories too. Like my mind seems to be always wanting to move forward, and yeah, it's weird.
How do you understand? Because this is, I mean, it is something big for me, but how do you understand, or how do you see your work? If you could project it in the future, do you have any expectation of how people are going to view your work, or how you would want your work to be treated, or consumed, or read, or understood, or or do you care about those things, or?
No, to be quite honest, like for me, a painting is in a sense only interesting while I'm working on it, and usually that's also like how I know a painting is done, because it's like the urge of working on it is just evaporated, right? So that thought is out there in the world, and I view my paintings mostly like throwing a stone into a lake, right? Like
Mm.
it's I'm throwing the stone in there, and then the stone makes these rings in the water, and like I observe how these rings happen, but then you can tell where they will touch something and what kind of little wave patterns will happen. And to me it's completely part of what makes a painting alive. It's that a viewer encounters it, and we all encounter art with our own preconceptions and own life experiences and interpret it accordingly. And so like the painting will inevitably change with every viewer and for every viewer. And I think that's
Mm.
what makes it alive and wonderful and beautiful. Um, so
Do you
Yeah.
let go of those images? Like, do you feel like you can let go? Is it hard to part with them, or is it because I actually loved, I'm not going to quote you, but I love that you just said that a painting, what people actually get to see is the culmination of your excitement. So when your excitement dies down, that's the painting that we get. Like we as viewers are never going to be able to experience this, this creative force that's behind the painting, but we see the conclusion of all of that urge. I think that that's amazing because I honestly feel that, I mean, it's probably not the same as what you're describing, but I adore starting a painting. I am so energized when I have to. It's not like a tabula rasa. It's not like, there's nothing there and the excitement of saying, I'm going to put this stroke down and you feel like godlike and you're creating things as you go along. No, no, no. I think that's a bit too much. But I just feel that sense of attacking something for the first time and just being able to see if your intent can actually start to take shape and you can kind of see how things are being configured. And then maybe it's a disgrace and maybe it's terrible and maybe you didn't really understand what you were doing. But, maybe wonderful things start happening. And for me, nothing is as exciting as that moment where you start. Like nothing. In fact, everything else is just sometimes labor. And I guess, again, this is for me. But I started dreading when I did larger work, I started dreading larger paintings because when I started painting them, it was super exciting to sit down and then, kind of very freehand draw things out and then start blocking everything in. And eventually it was like, I already know what I have to do to finish this painting. Like, I just have to go through these steps to finish it. But I don't care like anymore. Like I just have to, it only becomes about finishing something and I guess what changed for me, it was this idea of eliminating like the word finish and just trying to solve something. I know it's probably semantics and it's me just,
No, I think that's a very good observation. I mean, it's to me, to be quite honest, like the most interesting point in a painting is exactly that solution. So for me, like a painting, when I started, there's like this anxious, nervous quality about it that, I love mountain climbing, and I know it mainly from going mountain climbing or on skiing or something. When you on top of a slope, when you ask yourself, like, okay, like, do I have it in me today, like, to go this really hard, steep, icy slope, or am I going to wipe out? And sort of that's the nervous tension that I have when I start a painting. But the most wonderful moment for me is always sort of right in the middle, when I know that the painting now it's over the hill. But it also has to do with like how my process over the years has changed. It's become a lot more free flowing, and there's a lot less pre-calculated in there, and so many of the recent paintings that are actually like a surprise for me when they finally fall into place, because oftentimes they turn out a whole lot different than I had ever thought that they would. And from that point,
So
it becomes actually very pleasurable. And you're like, oh yeah, like now I know the painting is finally over the hump. And before that, it's really like that, where I have the feeling it could still go completely off the rails.
have you had those moments? I mean, we've all had, but there's this kind of dumb preconceived idea that when we see work from painters that we admire, I mean, talking specifically about painting, but we never get to see paintings that painters are discontent with and that are frustrated by. And I don't know, do you deal with those constantly? Like, have you had many of those paintings, and what do you do with them? You just throw them away, paint over them, put
No,
them
absolutely.
aside?
I mean, like constantly there's paintings. I think like one thing that's really bizarre is like the more you try to tickle something new out of a painting, or that you try to go into a direction that you haven't gone before precisely like that. You encounter paintings that are hard for yourself to evaluate. Like just last week, I was working on a painting that I'm still not sure if I messed it up completely or if it's actually like a good painting. I really can't tell. And I'm, like for me, like one of the moments that have been in my development as a painter really gratifying, when I found a way of how to incorporate failures into my paintings. And part of the way that was possible was realizing, if you put enough hours into something, you can make it sort of work. But if something doesn't work after a certain, like if you've been working on something for a day and it's not clicking, then there's something essential wrong with it. And then I usually just go and scrape it out and paint over it and try to start it fresh. Different colors, or I redo the drawing, or sometimes I redo whole sections of her composition. And usually, like in the newer paintings, these spots show, and you can see even ghost images of the previous attempt that failed. And sometimes, like I spend more time on taking a part of the painting, erasing it, scraping it out, starting it over, scraping it out, starting it over. And then when it finally works, then it's like it takes no time at all to finish it. You know what I mean? But the all the previous steps of failure and trying it again and failing and trying again, they're very essential, because in the end, I don't want it to look forced or labored. I want it to look like it just happened, right? And still you can sense the underlying failures.
Do you trust anyone with, like, if you're stuck on something, do you go to anyone? Do you have friends, family that you talk to, or you trust yourself that even in that ignorant state that we are, because it is, or not ignorant. I'm not saying ignorance as if we lack the knowledge, but we are blind to it for some reason at that point. Or do you trust yourself to say, well, I just have to, reflect upon this a lot more, or just put it aside. But I will work things out. Like, I'm very stubborn, for example. I'm super, super stubborn, but it's not to say that I don't appreciate feedback. But I just think that many times feedback just takes me out of what I'm doing, and I don't need to hear like this outside, voice when a problem is actually, when I know I have to solve a problem that's inside this, set of rules that I'm trying to work with. So I usually just, people that know me already, they just know that it's almost like pointless to tell me, oh, this was, this area feels kind of weird. And it's not arrogance or anything. It's just that I feel that I have to work things out. So, this is a process that I have to go through. And I also do it in order to not, I guess, depend. I don't know if depend is the word, but I don't want to rely upon, if I have a doubt, I don't want to think that somebody else is going to make me feel comfortable about it. Like, I trust myself that if I'm uncomfortable, like, it is because I am uncomfortable, because I don't like it. Like, I could do something that 100 people like, and if I don't like it, I have to trust myself that I don't like it. Like, and I think that if I get used to just saying to people, oh, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think of this? Then I don't know. I'm gonna get into I don't know, this exchange that is probably gonna make me far more dependent on what they feel than what I try to solve, through myself. But I don't know, how do you go about it? Do you have people that you trust, and you try to show them, hey, this painting is, I don't like it. What do you think?
You know what? Like, to be quite honest, I don't have anyone. Like it's for me, it's a very solitary process and a struggle that happens with myself almost exclusively, which is also something that developed over time, I guess, because at Art Center when I started painting, there weren't really any other people painting. It was either illustrators or it was fine artists, and like what I was doing at the time, there was two other students maybe who were sort of going that direction. And partly it's my own insecurity. When I was at Arts, and I always felt like I was one of the worst, least talented students there, and I had to catch up to other people who were much, much better than I was. And it's, that sort of insecurity has carried through to this day, sort of, that I'm still, I'm not sure that I think that I'm a good painter, really, for myself, like when I'm honest to myself.
You are fishing for compliments.
No. I mean, like, I know, like, it's like after.
I'll talk for half an hour on how amazing you are.
No. Like,
Dude, Ruprecht, I can build your ego, super easily.
No. I mean, no. You've done that plenty. But that's a completely different thing, right? Like for how you measure up to yourself and your own expectations, and how measuring up to somebody else. And it's just a weird process. But I find, like, I don't know, like, how do you feel that has the social media stuff, like, that's because that's essentially how I got to know your work. How do you feel has that changed things for you? Because
I think you're 74, right? 1974. I'm 77.
Yeah.
So we're pretty much the same generation, really. And the thing for me, and I think it's almost like a blessing, to be completely honest with you, I don't care. Like, I don't care about social media. I genuinely don't. Like, and I know that saying, I say that knowingly, and I know that people can actually take that comment personally. Like, if I tell people, oh, I could care less if I have a number on, my Instagram account, people go like, well, I'm one of those numbers. Are you saying that I don't care? And it's not like, of course, as a human being, I care for that person. And I've been able to, with a very minute percentage of whatever that, abstract number means, I've been able to have meaningful exchanges and understand them as human beings. And that's wonderful. But it's a tiny, tiny, percentage of what that number, that dumb number means. But I'm always very honest with people. I always tell them, I am doing this for myself. Like, when I do, like, this project that we're working on with my girlfriend, when I sit down and paint, I'm doing this for me. Like, I wish that I could say that people play a part in this and that that's the way we could socialize it, but I don't. But I don't feel that this is a selfish act either. I just think that this is a moment of self-reflection, in essence, that's my moment to understand things through painting. Like, that's every day I paint, and it's a moment where I, try to figure things out through painting. But so it has to be, in order for it to work, it has to be a moment with myself. I can't think if something is going to be liked or disliked, or if people are going to give me, good comments or bad comments, because I come from a generation where that never mattered. And because I think that when I started out, I had to do all the legwork that you have to go to, like, galleries, physical galleries. And I had I'm going to say portfolio, but I used to lug around like a tube with 3 paintings. And I used to just unroll the paintings on the floor of the galleries that I was visiting, and just on the hopes of people just saying, oh, wow, that's really nice. Yeah, we want more of that. It didn't really work. I went through tens and tens of galleries where they thought that I was an imbecile, just, putting paintings on the floor. But I, that's where my I guess my skin got thick in a way because there was so much rejection. Like the story that I told you about with this guy and Nathan, it was so direct and it was so quick and it was so, you almost immediately got a sense of, yeah, we don't like you. You're worthless, or you're not good enough, or it's not, you're too young, or it's not time for you. Just paint more. And those were the things that really shaped me, I feel. Not, so I'm almost like immune to just somebody saying, "Oh, why do you have little followers in your YouTube channel?" and or wow, this image didn't get enough likes. Or to me, it's so abstract. That moment is so abstract that I don't care about it. Like it has no. I could tell you right now, I don't lose sleep over it. Like not a minute of sleep, because I'm completely disconnected to it. Now so I am using that tool, but I'm not playing that game. Like we are totally convinced that we don't want to be concerned about engagement, or all these like words that honestly don't mean anything. Now the good thing is that my circumstances were weird because I had worked with a couple of galleries here that were super, super, great, that were amazing. One of them in particular is one of the galleries that took me, to fairs around the world. And he's that sort of person that you would always want to have in your life. And when we met, he said, "I love your work. Just you only concern yourself with painting whatever you want to paint. And I'm going to concern myself with selling it. And that's it." And I was like, "Oh,
That's
this is
perfect.
amazing." And I worked and I worked for 8 years with him, and he eventually closed up his gallery. And it was super sad for me at that moment, because it wasn't just that I had this place where I could make a living. It actually symbolized a relationship. And I realized how much I depended on him, and how, I immediately felt that if I wasn't with him, like I wasn't with anyone. And I think social media became eventually this place where I just, in a very strange way, just took control of the things I do. So it's not about skipping the gallery system, although I'm quite critical of the gallery system, but it's not about just pushing them away and skipping them and telling them, "Oh, F you, I'm going to do things by myself." But it's about controlling how I, communicate things, and how I can have, not an audience that is an abstract number, a stupid abstract number, but, the very small percentage of the people that actually are interested in what I do, I can speak directly to them, and it's pretty nice. That's the very nice moment. And I tried to find a way to reimagine, what my market would be if I started speaking to those people directly. And that's why, this project came to be, and why we're selling paintings, in a, I always try to shy away from saying in a very, inexpensive amount, because no, still $250. It's money for a lot of people right now, so I don't want to offend anyone by saying, yeah, this is super cheap. It's $250. But that's, that's the kind of path that we carved for ourselves. But yeah, I care because there are real people behind there, but I don't care. I will never let that have an effect on my creative process at all.
Yeah.
Never. I think that's the best way to show some resistance, is to say, yeah, this is just a tool, but I'm doing, what I want to do. So
No, you know what? I meant it actually. I mean, I agree. It's, for me, it's the same thing. It's the numbers are very abstract, and they, I don't know, like maybe I'm still such an old-fashioned person, but if I don't know these people, it's very hard to comprehend what the meaning of it is. But I've had actually 2 years ago, I think that was, I had this beautiful thing happen to me, which sort of made it a little bit more real. And that's what I'm was aiming for with the question, anyways. So there was I was in a part of a group show in Denmark. Denmark is several islands, and that was on one of the second largest islands, about 3 hours away from Copenhagen. And there was like this really young kid on the opening, and he always was kind of standing on the sides, and you could tell that he wants to talk to me. So eventually I went over to him and I said like, hey, like, how you doing? And nice to meet you, and thanks for coming to the opening. And he's like, oh yeah, like, like I know your work from Instagram, and I've seen it there, and I really liked it. And then I've seen that you have this show here in Denmark. So I hopped on a train, and he took a 3-hour train ride to the opening to see one painting live.
That's amazing.
And then he went back 3 hours and have a conversation, and like he was thinking about studying art. I have no idea if he actually went through with it. But to me, that for the first time illustrated to me what the strength of Instagram can be, because I agree that to me it's also completely meaningless in a lot of ways. Like, what do the likes mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, like, I'm happy and I appreciate when people like something, but I don't know if you've noticed that, like, if it took me ages to get back to your messages too, because I'm too rarely on there. But at the same time, like, it enables us to see art that we would never ever otherwise see, right? Especially like contemporary figurative artists. Like, I mean, there's like few enough galleries that will show our type of work in the first place. And then if you're living on a different continent like you and I do, it's completely it will never happen, or it's very, very rare that we will actually be able to see each other's work live, right? And in that sense, Instagram is a beautiful medium. I'm also curious, like, because you touched on it in your the thing you were last saying about how you try to find galleries, because that, to me, like, you being the same age, like, it must have been, like, I remember the process was so grueling trying to find a gallery, and for me, like, especially, being a European, and I knew that eventually probably I wanted to be in Europe again. And the first time I sent like some of my stuff to a German gallery, they were actually kind enough to answer, but they were sending back a letter saying, these are nice little technical exercises. When are you going to start making real paintings? I'm like, yeah, okay, don't mind, you suckers. But for me, like, the most bitter thing about that was that about 2 or 3 years later, like, the whole Leipzig school thing happened. And all of a sudden, everybody, like, people who were laughing at me, like, laughing in my face when I showed them like my work, and they're like, come on, like, nobody's going to show figurative paintings today. Like, what the hell do you think you're doing? We're like, we're a serious gallery. Like, we show real art, like, not this stuff. And, 5 years later or 3 years later, the same people would have like the whole gallery stuffed with pseudo Leipzig artists. Right. And it was so infuriating at the time. It was one of those experiences where you're like, oh man, like this, I'm not even sure why I'm in this business.
Yeah. No, what you're saying is absolutely true. When you were speaking about Instagram as a socializing tool, I remember when I was in school, it was, it was almost the responsibility fell solely on my teacher's shoulders to show us work of artists that we didn't know about, because it was it was improbable that you would go to and I was in New York, but so I could go to Marlborough Gallery or to Forum Gallery or to Mary Boone or Gagosian. I could go to, I think it was Gagosian when I went to see Jenny Savile's work. So that was a way to discover things, but, things that we didn't really know about. I remember knowing about Ewan Uglo because one of my teachers had a catalog from a show that he had, bought, 10 years before. And if it wasn't for that moment, like at that time in my life, I would have never known who Coldstream was or who you and Uglo was. So I would have completely missed that moment of painting that could have shaped me. And in my case, like a lot of the the conceptual understanding of drawing that Antonio Lopez has and William Coldstream and you and Uglo have, that was something that really interested me. And then I took that and, I looked at Giacometti and then I thought, oh, I could probably mix a lot of these things together and there's something kind of cool there. So the cool thing is that, yes, there's probably like 13, 14-year-olds today watching their phones and they're looking, I remember when they showed us Russian itinerants, when we saw Kramskoy and Repin, Shishkin, and it was like, where did these painters come from? Like all any school teaches you, and every time you took a history of painting book out, it was the turn of the century, like 19th to 20th century, was just Impressionism and Post-Impressionism and modernist art. But I never knew like Russian painting existed. Like I in my mind, I was like, there's icon paintings and then there's Malevich. I was like, yeah, I'm sure something happened in between, but I have no clue what it was. So,
and they've got such a distinct style, don't they? Like it's so different from Western European painting.
Oh yeah, and right, because they have their own history. They were closed off to everyone, and they were like, we are making our own painting here, and I find that fascinating. But if it wasn't for my teachers, I would have never known, who these painters were ever. And it's so cool to think that you could just see a dumb hashtag that says Kramskoy, and you could just say, who's Kramskoy? And you could just Google that. And, if you have enough like willingness to kind of feed that curiosity, you can go to Google and say, oh my God, what is this painter? And who were all these other painters that were his friends? And, why are they so different than what, Eurocentric 19th century painting was? But yeah, in that sense, that's absolutely amazing. And in terms of the galleries here, I mean, Colombia has like I always say like a resilient market. There is an art market. There are art collectors. Latin American painting always has this very different sense because, if you think about it, we were colonized. So whatever we knew about painting comes from these very second-hand Spanish painters that came to South America. It's not the greatest of painting. Like if you really dive into what Colombian painting, for example, is, it's very, very strange. It's very weird, and it's a very new history of painting. We don't have anything like, a German history of painting or the Spanish history of painting or Italian history of painting. So for me, it was really weird because people would tell me, and I was, in my 20s at the time, early 20s, or like 24, 25, and people would tell me, I would show my paintings and they were like, well, you don't really look like a Colombian painter. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? What does a Colombian painter look like? Like, I in my mind, I was like, I know Colombian painting. I know it by heart, but what does that even mean? Like, that's so strange. And one of the things about broadening this market nowadays is that there's no such expectation. Like the students that I dealt with were so aware of international artists, so much so that you sometimes had to remind them that, okay, but if you try to contextualize this in terms of Colombia, like what are the artists that you would think of? So it was actually harder to try to insert that sense of the native quality of art. So it was when I was working here trying to find a place. Yeah, it was very tough.
Right. Yeah, it's I find that very peculiar. Anyway, if like what makes a painting look European or German or something. I mean, something that always cracked me up while I was living in LA. I get so many comments of people looking at my paintings and like, oh, this is like a very German light you've got in your paintings. It's not at all an LA light. And then as soon as I went back to Germany, like people were like looking at my painting and they're like,
super American.
oh yeah, it's such an LA light you've got in your painting. Look, what does that even mean? I don't understand. Yeah.
You belong to no place. That's what it means.
I think that's what it comes down to, right? Like that an artist has no choice but to define their own place, where they are and who they are, and I think that's what distinguishes good artists throughout art history, that they've found their very own peculiar place, and it's probably more that there's emblematic artists who found their own language, then defined what the art of a particular place is supposed to look like. Mm-hmm. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Right? Like had Impressionism not happened in France, like now we all associate Impressionistic painting with France, right? And we say, yeah, that's typical French painting in a way. But had it happened in Spain, like we would now think, oh yeah, like Spanish art looks impressionistic. You know what I mean? Like so, I'm not even sure that I mean, like there's certain peculiarities about how certain countries there seems to be a dominating character in certain countries. Like it's almost inconceivable. German painters painting as life-affirming paintings as, for example, Italian painters usually do, and but Spanish painters, for example, are very dark oftentimes, which I find fascinating. Right, like there seems to be they also seem to have like an appreciation for the dark side of life, very much so.
Well, that's the Inquisition for you, so and colonizing a whole lot of South America. That'll probably do that.
That's true.
No, but for example, what you're saying, Goya to me is in many ways undoubtedly a Spanish painter, because you can see a lot of like the Spanish tradition of painting in him. But at the same time, he's almost like completely insular. Like he is an island in this universe of painting. I love Goya, and I've never been able to pinpoint him to say, oh yeah, this is romantic painting, or, this belongs to a specific year and it makes sense. It doesn't. To me, in my mind, he doesn't make sense, and I'm perfectly fine with it. Like, I don't have the ability to tie some of his works to any point in history. I mean, aside from the ones that he did just trying to show how Spanish he was and how not French he was, and just dealing with, a bunch of issues in his life. But when he painted his house and he has these black paintings that were done for himself, like literally for himself, I don't think that they belong anywhere, nowhere. There's, I'm sure you know that painting, but these two guys that are killing themselves, they're fighting with these, that's just like primeval painting. That's almost like instinctual painting, I would say. But that has nothing to do with Spain or, romanticism or anything. That was just, this image that poured out. And it, not many, at least for me, I don't understand many images as being almost like, I don't want to say eternal, because I really hate that painting is in many ways associated with permanence. I really don't like that. And, we don't have to talk about that, but that's totally fine. But there are certain images that Goya did for me that I don't want to say they stand the test of time, but they can prolong themselves and they can morph themselves into all these different things, so that when people see them, they don't necessarily have to be viewed, like you were saying, for example, as an impressionistic painting. Like if you look at a Monet, then you have to contextually understand Impressionism. No, you could look at a Goya and it's just very human, very, very primitive painting. And it almost taps into something that I don't know. I don't even know if we understand. I hope I'm not sounding super esoteric about this, but
No, not at all. Like, I think, um, like what I often think about is that there's certain human experiences that are at once universal and extremely individual experiences, and that every person has to experience themselves, and every person, or potentially every person could experience them. Like, let's take, because you were describing it before, like the birth of your first child or your children, right? It's like people gush all the time about, oh yeah, like experiencing birth, it was so special, like my kid when it was born. And like, if you didn't have that experience, you're like, yeah, whatever, man. Yeah, everybody tells me it's special, get over it, right? Like, you can't have it secondhand. But when you then experience it yourself, you're like, holy smoke, this is so incredibly intense and such a beautiful experience. And then you're sort of lost for words, and you're gushing about it yourself because it seems so like something that happened to you, right? So it's very personal, very your life experience, your very own individual experiences. And at the same time, everybody has those on a level. And I think that's what's beautiful when artists manage to capture some of that common ground, right? Because that's where we can actually connect with these experiences that we all share and we all know, and we can see, oh wow, like this happens over time. And I think that's what makes this Goya painting that you were talking about, of the two guys battling it out, makes that so tangible for us, because it like, we've seen that shit happen again and again and again in every generation, right? Like, we know these people, and you can tell, like, from, it reminds me a lot of that final scene in the Reservoir Dogs, right? Like, where they all stand in a circle and they shoot each other.
yeah,
It's essentially the same gesture, and it's still, it's such a fresh, where you're like, oh yeah, shit, that's exactly how it is, right? And I think that's, to me, that is what propels me to keep making art, and what I love most about art, that it's a conversation that can transcend time and space, where you can have like a conversation with somebody who might be dead for hundreds of years, but you look at their paintings and you can tell, wow, like, this guy had a lot of the same sorrows that I had, and went through a lot of the same troubles that I had, and like, was full of love for his children, right? Like, let's take Rembrandt. Like, when I go and look at his paintings of himself in old age, and you can see this guy who's battered by life, and it makes you feel like, oh yeah, man, like this guy, he didn't have the sweet life all the time. Like, he was one of the most talented artists ever being born, but his life wasn't all sugar cake. And then, like, in the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, there's like this beautiful portrait of his son, and you can tell, like, he was full of that love of a father for his children. And I know these experiences, and I can feel with him and through him being reminded of what it means to be a human, and what it means to love your children, and what it means to feel life is battering you. You know what I mean? So I think that's what makes it beautiful. And there's so much time between when he was alive and now that I'm alive.
Yeah. Just to you've been amazing, by the way, but I don't want to keep you too much, because I told you that we would go for this amount of time. But just as a final question, like, do you, I guess, not anticipate yourself to try and see what comes in the future for you and your work, but do you have a sense of a direction that you're heading, or do you have, an intent, or do you wish something to happen with your painting that perhaps hasn't happened yet? Maybe it is about the way in which you socialize it, or the scale in which you socialize it, or it is about just painting the paintings that you want to say, telling or proposing the stories that you want to propose to people. But do you kind of see what, or do you have an intuition of what, lies ahead, or what the road looks like for you in the future?
No, no. To be quite honest, no. That's another thing. Well, that I don't think about it is not true. I mean, like, I'm mostly thinking about how I can best represent my work. Sort of like like I think as an artist, you're always caught between the two polarities of being an artist and of trying to be a salesperson for the art that you're making. And I think it's almost like a schizophrenic kind of thing, because you can't be a good salesperson if you're in your artist personality, and you can't be a good artist if you're a salesperson, right? Because if you're a salesperson, you have to be standing there and saying like, yeah, my stuff is the greatest thing that ever happened since hot buttered toast. But that doesn't work if you're trying to think critically about your own work. And but at the same time, I feel there's sort of like a responsibility to represent the paintings best that I can, right? Aside from my own vanity that I want people to see them and see their worth, it feels like it's sort of a gift being able to be in the studio and paint. And then it becomes part of the responsibility to share that as well. But that's sort of like one thing, and that's something that I think it's more where strategic thinking can happen. With where the paintings will develop, I'm gleefully, happily let them go the way that they go. Because I don't know like how you feel about it, but when I look back at my work, or look back at where I was 5, 6, 10 years ago, and you would have shown me paintings that I do now, like myself from back then would have been like, whoa, this is like where it developed, man. Like I don't know, man. I couldn't have imagined it. Like it's really unpredictable how the paintings have developed. And to me, it's sometimes there's doors opening all of a sudden, creative doors. And if you dare walking through them, like whole new worlds can open up of possibilities, what you can do with your art. And and they're completely surprising, like it's like sometimes I remember in 2013, like that's the very beginning of the new book. And that's probably like why this is one of the most important books for me to publish. Is because it documents this where all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, like this door opened where I felt, oh wow, like now I've gotten really a whole lot closer to where I think my paintings should be, right? And but there's like such a vague notion because you haven't seen them yet, like where you think they should be. You know what I mean? Like it's like this constant process of searching for something that you don't know exactly what it looks like. I mean, I oftentimes think of it a little bit like being on the Odyssey, right? Like the Odysseus when he was trying, like the whole Odyssey is actually like his journey trying to get home. And he goes on all these detours and has all these adventures. And that's how it feels, sort of trying, like my career as an artist feels like to me, that I'm searching for a home that I'm not quite sure like how it looks like, but I'm pretty sure when I see it that I'm there. You know what I mean? And sometimes I get to an island where I'm like, oh yeah, like this could be it. No, it's not quite it yet. I have to get back out to sea.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's a wonderful way of putting it. What happens to me, I'm going to finish this soon, but what happens to me is that I look back and I don't really know how I painted some things. You know, my better paintings, when I look back, I'm like, and I've had the chance, not with all the paintings, but just with a few paintings that I know who who owns them, and throughout the years I've been able to see them, and whenever I have the chance, I look at them and I'm like, I have no clue how I painted this. I have no recollection. Like if you told me now to try and paint that painting, my easiest answer would be I just don't know how to do it. I wouldn't be able to paint it. Like the painting feels very different now, and I understand it so differently that I even doubt that I have the ability that I probably had at that point. And it just goes to show that every moment kind of dictates its own rules, and it transforms everything. And I feel like I am the same artist, like I'm the same human being. More importantly, I mean, I've grown, but in that growing, like there's a ton of things that I've probably chosen to just not neglect, but just understood that yeah, this is a path that I walked, and that's it. That's I don't know if I can go back. I don't know if it happens to you, but I get many people sometimes saying, "Oh, I love uh, the 2020 paintings that you're doing are super nice, but you know what I love? I love the 2008 Ruprecht. I love that moment. Could you do this painting for me? Like,
All that happens all the time to me.
yeah, they throw money in your face and they go like, could I have another big elephant? And you try to tell them, no, that came out at that moment like that. But probably today, if I do an elephant, I end up doing like, a cockroach and then a guy with an umbrella on top of it. And I don't know. But yeah, people think that that's something that you can feed upon like constantly. And the truth is it's not like I don't want to say it's gone, but it's not there. It's not supposed to be there. I feel like if you do things well, that place is not a place that you can go back to. It's not a fountain that you can go back to. I mean, it's going to be there and you can revisit it, but it's going to be completely different. So,
But you know what? Like, there's like I think there's something very, or you can have like a positive view of that too, because that's one of the reasons why I actually not even don't mind letting go of artwork, but I'm happy when it gets out of the studio. Because especially successful paintings where you think like, wow, this this was really one of my better efforts today. It's great to have them gone and out of the studio, because otherwise they're just like this thing where you always try to measure up to that particular painting. But every particular painting, I think, had like a whole concoction of the moment, the mood you've been in, what else was happening in your life, the working hours and how you could structure them at the time. And all of that flows into the painting and makes the painting at that moment, that particular painting. And it's, to me, that's completely unrecreatable. Like, even if you told me now, can you paint the same exact painting again? Like, I'd be like, no, it's not going to happen. It's like, I couldn't even now copy the painting from yesterday. You know what I mean? Not even mentioning paintings from way back.
I know. But thank you. Honestly, I hope that this felt more like a conversation than just like an interview. I hope I didn't ask you things that you were like, oh my God, the same questions I get asked like over and over again. This is so annoying. And I have to be honest, I know I've read stuff, from, about you on the internet. I have, but I didn't really look up anything just so that I don't know. I was like, oh, should I ask about this? And I was going to write questions and I didn't do that. I hope it wasn't laziness, and I hope that I'm just trusting myself that I could have like an open conversation with you, and that would feel probably a little bit better than just asking a bunch of abstract questions that didn't really tie each other, together. So thank you. I know we've exchanged like, bits of emails and conversations, but this is like the first conversation we've had, and I couldn't have wanted it to go like better. You know, this was really nice. Thank you so much. I hope I hope that my fanboyism didn't show up, you know, that much, because I know that can be uncomfortable too. So
No, you know, I just hope like it, hopefully after this crazy Corona thing is passed, that we at some point get to sit together and have a real conversation with some nice food and a glass of beer or something. That'd be really great.
Oh, excellent.
And
Excellent.
yeah, and we should at some point we should trade some artwork if you feel like it.
Oh, don't, you know, now this is evidence. You know, you said it. You can't take it back. You realize this, right?
No, I'm not taking it back.
Yeah, but I want you to be conscious. I hope that you're not drunk at this moment, that you know that you're in your full capacity, and you just said that you're going to trade, you know, paintings with me. So this is going to be socialized, Ruprecht. I just want to make that clear. People are going to be listening to this. They are what we understand as no, I'm being stupid now. No, thank you.
No, I'd love to trade paintings, and yeah, I hope we can meet up in person at some point, at some time in our lives. But it was great fun. It was really fun talking to you and meeting you face to face. And yeah.
Thank you, Ruprecht. Thank you so much.